Good evening, Chelsea fans. The international break has come and gone, but Enzo Fernandez and Marc Cucurella certainly did their best to keep things interesting and bleak as ever for the Blues. We'll be discussing all things Chelsea after a routine win over Port Vale in the FA Cup sees Chelsea return to Wembley later this month against Leeds United. For our topics this week, we'll be taking a step back from matters on the pitch here and now and ranking Chelsea's top 5 worst transfers ever, comparing and contrasting between George and I, and looking a bit closer at the corrosive effects that some of those within the BlueCo organisation are having on the club, with a particular focus and emphasis on Joe Shields, Chelsea's Director of Recruitment and Talent. We'll also be previewing Sunday's return in the Premier League with the home fixture against Man City, with returning guest and general manager of The Rest is History, Dom Johnson. Let's get into it.
The international break provided some much-needed respite for Resenya's Blues. Fresh off the back of 4 consecutive losses, the worst run of form for Chelsea since 1993. The Blues manage a convincing 7-0 win against lowly League One opposition Port Vale, and critically, Wembley awaits.
Yeah, not a huge amount, I think, to pick out specifically from this game, George, which is obviously quite a rare thing to say when you are coming off the back of a 7-0 scoreline. Ultimately, we were playing in the quarter-final of the FA Cup against bottom of League One at home for a place at Wembley in the semi-final, even given our absolutely disastrous form with 4 L's on the bounce and a couple of whispers pre-game of, potentially a shock upset. Thankfully, we got off to a strong start with Hato getting on the score sheet from an early corner. And actually, I think Hato is one of the few talking points from this game and definitely the star that shone brightest within this fixture. And it ended up being a pretty routine win for Chelsea. A couple of shaky moments off the back of that first goal, bit of pressure into Chelsea's box from Port Vale, quite Route 1 stuff, really, and a couple of instances where Tosin, back in the team ahead of Bong, which, as we'll discuss shortly, got spun by their striker. I just remember him by the name Sheriff. He's quite a distinctive figure up front. But yeah, not a huge amount, I think, from this, but great to sort of stem the tide following the 4 defeats on the bounce and to register a win and to secure our place back at Wembley and to see Esteval back in the team and giving us a very timely reminder of just what we've been missing in those several weeks preceding the international break, where a combination of personal reasons or injury, something between the two maybe, resulted in him being completely absent in that dreadful run of form. And it's absolutely fantastic to have him back and excited for what's to come there. One of the rare green shoots of recovery within this Chelsea team. And Caicedo getting a much needed rest. We'll take that whenever it can come.
I think the tone for this fixture was very much set with the lineup. So the likes of Palmer, João Pedro, even Sanchez in net, I guess, Esteval back, you mentioned, all starting, very much indicated not only the importance of this tie, but also potentially the pressure that Liam Rosenior is under. While the likes of Arteta opted to essentially have an extended break, the decision was to go strong here. And so much so that, as you say, the really promising Josh Acheampong was omitted from the 11, eventually making his way onto the pitch at right back. We had a episode early days now, many months back, about justice for Josh Acheampong. It felt like under Maresca, he was scapegoated at times. Some really impressive showings at the start of the season against tough number 9s, the likes of Mateta, Awoniyi, Chris Wood are cool. I was convinced Rosenior would be the man to bring him back into the fold. And ultimately, he's found himself way down the pecking order. I think even that Sarr recall, the fact that Sarr was chosen ahead of him at right back, a position he'd never been deployed in. And again, at the weekend, you mentioned Tosin Adarabioyo back in the 11. And with Chalobah's injury, you'd only suspect he is the man going into City upcoming on Sunday. But the Acheampong position now looks very precarious. Shades of Lewis Hall, I would say. Are BlueCo in the context of these great financial losses, potentially looking to usher him towards an exit?
You can see it a mile off. I mean, all this continuous briefing that he's imperative to the future of this project, but that's never translated in the number of minutes he's getting as you say, I think a 35 million to 40 million pure profit bid from Crystal Palace and Newcastle will be enough to prize him away from Chelsea. And you can see it a mile off us reassessing this moment, as we did with Lewis Hall, as we did with Livramento, with Mark Guehi. It's going to be another repeat case of this down the line, almost certainly.
The frustrating part is just how imperious and impressive he often looks. I mean, yes, Port Vale tax, but even coming on at right back, how many centre halves look so competent, so technical? He's obviously got the stature, got the build. You want him to fill out in time, but he's got all the hallmarks of being a top player going forward.
So into the semi-final, George, a pretty straightforward route we've had to Wembley. Can't really complain about that. Not even faced Premier League's opposition once on this route so far, but Leeds United await for us in the semi-final, a team that we've only picked up 1 point from in our two fixtures this season, and was the scene of an Enzo Maresca crime at Ellen Road. We saw the bottle at Stamford Bridge from a two-goal advantage being squandered. So it's a side that seemed to have our number, and Daniel Farke's switched formations a couple of times against Chelsea to great effect. But how do you assess this as a semi-final?
Seen many a joke and jibe about heated balls in the context of this draw. Obviously, the highlight of the weekend was Arsenal crashing out, and this very much opened up that potential to go all the way. And yeah, as you mentioned, we can have no complaints with the draw, crucially avoiding City before a potential final berth. And Leeds, that trip to Wembley, I'm personally not a fan of semi-finals at Wembley, but shades of kind of those 1970 Cup final, bit of juice there, should be a good atmosphere. Footballing terms, I think it'll be a very tough match. Lads need to turn up ultimately.
And just lastly, on the Port Vale game, talk going into this match was clearly dominated by one topic and one topic alone. Enzo Fernandez, who made use of his time away from the club with the Argentina squad to make his very open flirtations with a move to Real Madrid. Obviously, followed up with a clear statement from Liam Rosenior with the imposition of a two-match ban for that Port Vale game and also Man City in the Premier League to come. How do you see this one, George? It feels like this has been bubbling under the surface for a while and it's finally on the topic now.
The headline talking point for Chelsea, fortunately, no major injuries, an international break, many a injury decried in the past. This time it had to be speculation fueled. So Enzo, we touched upon on the last pod, flirting with a move elsewhere, Madrid, namely, in the aftermath of that humiliating performance against PSG. Cucurella arguably doing similar on Spain duty, but critically, Enzo, following on from the backlash, clearly there would have been words in the club, decided to go again, to reinstate desire to live in Madrid, talks of parallels with Buenos Aires. First time can be semi-forgiven, flouting with Argentinian national journalists, potentially lost in translation. Second, third time, the Fabrizio Romano briefs, there's a clear positioning here for an exit, as far as I'm concerned. And I actually praise Rosenior for the two-match ban. The amount of lazy journalism, rival fans in the office decrying the decision from a footballing perspective. One of your best players banning him ahead of that City game. We'll preview City later, but I'm certainly not sure it'll be as big a loss from the footballing standpoint. And I think a mark needs to be made before potential mutiny occurs. Players looking to jump a sinking ship is only going to be self-fulfilling in the sinking process for me. Enzo Fernandez has dominated the discourse around Chelsea the past couple of weeks. Self-fulfilled for the most part. He represents the most expensive outlay Chelsea of all time, 121 million euros as per transfer market. And this stoked debate as to Chelsea's worst transfers ever. So for a bit of fun this week, we are going to debate and contest our top 5 worst Chelsea transfers of the Premier League era. Let's kick it off, Ryan.
So just to preface this with a bit of an insight into my criteria for this, because I guess it's open to interpretation, the idea of a worst ever signing. My view is that this is relative, obviously, to their cost to be acquired, but also their output on the pitch, but crucially their impact on the team over an extended period. So, for instance, we know the likes of Sebastian Veron, Alvaro Morata, Danny Drinkwater, Gonzalo Higuain were all shocking signings in their own right and acquired for significant amounts of money, but ultimately all were shipped without too much long-term impact on the team. So definitely want to preface that with this in mind. And a bit of a disclaimer, I'm probably in hindsight slightly prone to recency bias here. But number 5, I've gone for Fernando Torres. The weight of expectation got the better of him from the very outset, a combination of mentality, but also injuries. I think we signing a damaged product at the time, and it felt pretty much over following that first game against Liverpool. After he was signed on deadline day, playing against his old club a couple of days later, and he never recovered his previous form, despite his Chelsea career being interspersed with some of these quite memorable moments when you look back on it. The Nou Camp goal, winning that corner in Munich for the equaliser, Man City at home under Mourinho, and obviously getting the opening goal in the cup final of the Europa League as well under Benitez. Ultimately, this was supposed to be our Drogba replacement, but ended up being outshone by him, and we were struggling right until Diego Costa came in.
The interesting one, re Torres, is say the iconic moments, particularly in the Nou Camp, probably just shaded him in that sort of 5 to 10 territory for me. Number 5 for me is another striker. I was tempted to be facetious here and include Enzo for those comments, but I've gone with Romelu Lukaku for similar vein. So the fact that there was that £75 million loss just one season, mere matter of months before he started wanting away, flirting with Inter Milan, and ultimately derailing Champions League winning side, a side that I thought was primed to kick on and dominate under Thomas Tuchel. So not only a massive financial loss, but also a bit of a cultural loss for the Blues. He doesn't feature higher for me purely because he did actually score 8 and 16. So on the pitch, he's clearly, whether you feel he was a top player, he was clearly a competent footballer. Did score for us, particularly in that last win at the Emirates. And also had that Carabao VAR, wrongly ruled VAR, offside against Liverpool stood, it all could have been different.
Interesting. I do have Romelu Lukaku on my list, so we will discuss him in due course. But keeping the momentum here, number 4 for me, I've gone for Raheem Sterling. This was a £60 million signing who received a mega contract of 350k or there or thereabouts a week from BlueCo, and he was obviously the first major signing that kicked off the BlueCo regime. And my view on Sterling before he even came throughout his time at Liverpool and City was that he was very much a player that always looked better in a great team, alongside the likes of Kevin De Bruyne, Aguero, Bernardo Silva, David Silva, Rodri, and ultimately he never adapted to Chelsea and significantly became a massive financial drain on the club, with that loan to Arsenal, which was part funded by Chelsea, and then no one picking him up following that and forming part of the bomb squad and generating sympathy in the media and clearly having a PR disaster effect on the club as well as a financial one. And I feel this, going back to my criteria, it just feels like the ripple effects of this transfer are still being felt in that left wing position where we're still unresolved with Mudryk, who's got his own issues, the drug ban, not adapting to English football, and Garnacho and Gittins. It's just been a series of unfortunate events at left wing that were kicked off and pioneered by Raheem Sterling.
Sterling finds himself in Torres territory for me, 5 to 10. He did have some decent showings in Chelsea Blue, goals against City, a couple of braces. His output on paper wasn't horrendous, even if it ended in ugly fashion. For me, at number four, I have actually included Danny Drinkwater. Again, much like Lukaku, he was emblematic of the dross given to Antonio Conte following the most incredible of title wins. So we were linked with the likes of Lewandowski, Van Dijk. It felt back then, say we pit Pep, City, Klopp's Liverpool, it felt as if we were primed to really compete at the top and challenge for Europe again, which in likely fashion we did under Tuchel. But ultimately, at 40 million, best part of 40 million as a squad builder, I completely disagree with the premise of signing squad players anyway. And his lack of output is well documented. That's £40 million loss. Also for a player who is happy to sit and run down his wages in even more disgraceful fashion, I would argue, than Raheem Sterling.
Yeah, I now getting flashbacks to Danny Drinkwater's Instagram stories on his penthouse terrace when Chelsea were, off the back of a defeat, and he'd be picking his avocado and eggs, much to my annoyment. At number three, I've gone for Romelu Lukaku, who you've obviously mentioned already at number five, but also without going into too much detail, I mean, you covered most of it already. This was £100 million homecoming, just off the back of spearheading Inter to the Scudetto, 28 years of age and in the form of his life, and coming to rescue Chelsea, who'd been obviously lurching from striker disaster to disaster, the likes of sort of Torres, Falcao, Higuain, Batshuayi, and absolutely threw his toys out the pram. I think it was around October time with that interview to the Italian media, basically saying things haven't worked out how he wanted it to. He's not getting along well with the manager, Thomas Tuchel, and just decided to implode things after that significant amount of money that was invested in him, the love and the faith he was getting from the Chelsea fan base, and just hit implode. And I've never given him for that. You mentioned the financial loss of around, I think it was 70 million or more. So yeah, significant financial drain on the club, and added to our significant issues on that front. And he is number three for me.
Number three for me is the Shakhtar propaganda package, Mikhailo Mudryk. So the exact fee here, sort of difficult to trace, but I'll go with transfer markets, 62 million with potential add-ons, which thankfully look like they're never going to be reached. But ultimately, this signing for me was emblematic of the shocking, abysmal BlueCo recruitment policy. So few highlight reels, not a trace of the data-driven modeling that they purport to have believed in. And as per Todd Bowley's quote, purely interested in this one to try and pip Arsenal, which provided some momentary joy, but ultimately resulted in a player who was miles off the pace, needed serious coaching, and is ultimately nowhere near the squad due to the drug ban off the field.
Number two for me, and I'll try and get through this quickly, and I suspect there'll be a bit of duplication with you here. I have a feeling he'll be your number one, but Kepa Arrizabalaga. I mean, take us back to summer 2018. This was a real sliding doors moment for Chelsea, following Thibaut Courtois' unceremonious departure to Madrid, which meant Marina Granovskaya, the footballing director at the time, had a big job on her hands finding that replacement. And this was obviously following years of stability in that position with Petr Cech and Thibaut Courtois really setting the benchmark for an elite goalkeeper. And we were linked with some big names that summer, none other than Alisson Becker from Roma, who we unfortunately didn't proceed with, and we ended up going for this unknown 72 million world record fee for a keeper called Kepa Arrizabalaga. And I think alarm bells were ringing straight away when you saw him in person. At the bridge, that first home game, I think it was Arsenal, the 3-2 win under Maurizio Sarri, and you saw his unimposing sort of physique and height, his T-Rex arms, and he let in two of the most simple shots you'll ever see from distance. I think it was Mkhitaryan and someone else. He defined the art ultimately of just letting long shots go in, but making it look like an amazing strike. He was known for his distribution, but ultimately it was average, and his career at Chelsea will always be remembered for those two Carabao Cup finals, refusing to be subbed under Maurizio Sarri and missing the penalty after coming on against Liverpool and not saving a single pen. I think it was in 12 or 13 rounds of penalties. And we talk about the longevity impact. He stayed at Chelsea for such a long period. He signed in 2018 and he was replaced briefly by Edouard Mendy, obviously, when Chelsea won the Champions League back in 2021, only for Kepa to worm his way back in following that in our disaster season in 2023. And finally, we let go of him and he ended up going to Arsenal and writing a third chapter in the Carabao Cup final, fortunately, recently. But again, this one, I feel like the effects of Kepa are still being felt, and we've still yet to replace Petr Cech or Thibaut Courtois.
Number two for me, however, is Wesley Fofana. So just about avoids that top berth due to the fact that his unavailability, potentially marginally less damaging than permanent availability. Much like Raheem Sterling, one of the poster boy initial signings without a sporting director, one of Bowley's sort of vanity buys. Definition of a panic buy for me. It was 75 million off the back of a leg break. He's never been remotely back at the level, sustained spells on the sidelines, and further breaks the newfound Chelsea wage structure. So you've got this joker pissing around, laughing on the bench, earning 200 grand a week, tied down to a 7-8 year contract. So we're stuck with him for a while. I envisage financial losses close to akin to that of Lukaku's. But as I say, his availability just about kept him from that top berth for me.
And that number one for me is a no-brainer. Wesley Fofana, a player who I've said previously symbolizes the sheer and utter decay of Chelsea Football Club in the modern era. This was our, marquee signing alongside Raheem Sterling off the back of a leg break and an ACL. And his body is completely unfit for purpose. And even when he has played, which has been few and far between in his many years at Chelsea since 2022 now, he's proven himself absolutely shocking at defending crosses. He's got limited recovery pace, doesn't read the flight of the ball well, and all of this for north of 250k a week. And it's the same dynamic for me as Enzo Fernandez. There seems to be this delusion amongst the Chelsea fan base that this is, our elite centre back who unfortunately is just absent because of injury and a player who always seems to get better when he's not playing. Arrogance personified. I don't feel like he's asked if Chelsea win, lose, or draw as long as he gets paid. And this is supposed to be our, senior centre back in this young squad who consistently lets us down. And I have the feeling we're not going to be able to shift him for a long time to come unless Marseille come in and pluck him away from us. But another one who I fear we're going to be seeing the ripple effects of for many years now.
Number one for me, you guessed it, Kepa Arrizabalaga. De facto, the most nonsensical signing of all time for me. A world record fee for a goalkeeper. The starting point there for me has to be an imposing physical phenomenon. He's anything but that. Spindly, just about pushing 6 foot. Wouldn't look out of place in an under 13s lineup. The context of losing Courtois, missing out on Alisson, emblematic of our decline, as you mentioned. He ate goals. I remember one season where his save percentage was just about 50%, 1 in 2, but it was those long shots that he used to eat on regular occasions. The opposition buoyed by the lack of presence in net. And you mentioned it, those Carabao Cup final antics, the audacity of him to refuse substitution and proceed to perform so pathetically. Still unable to sell him years on, loan after loan. I say the one consolation is that he's now jeopardising Arsenal's fate, contributing strongly to them crashing out of 2 domestic cups. A few of the notable omissions from our top 5 transfers in Premier League history include 55 million Gittins, 55 million Lavia, League One Liam Delap coming in at 30 odd million pounds. And these all have one thing in common.
They do indeed, George, and that one thing in common is Joe Shields, who you may or may not have heard of. This is the former Southampton and Manchester City scout, now running his very own pyramid scheme at Chelsea as a senior scout. For context, and to go back and provide a bit of context around his story and his rise to Chelsea. So this is the man who became part of a organization called the Kinetic Academy back in 2013, and he met a number of people along the way who he'd go on to work with at clubs like Southampton, Man City, and others. And what this is essentially an independent youth academy organization helping kids to pursue a career as a pro. And he joined Chelsea in 2023 after his time as senior scout at Southampton and Man City, and proceeded to appoint a number of individuals who he met along this journey through the Kinetic Academy and clubs like Saints and City. And really, all these things are happening behind the scenes. There's not much visibility of these ongoings until the point where Enzo Maresca leaves Chelsea and the Kinetic boys are subject to a reshuffle of the pack. There's two components to this. There's firstly the Kinetic boys wrapping their tentacles around the club. So to name a few names, Callum McFarlane, promoted recently to assistant manager of Chelsea following his, I think, 1 or 2 games. I think it was Man City and Fulham in charge following Enzo Maresca's sacking. And his previous experience before being instated as the assistant manager was obviously as the coach of the under-21s for Chelsea. And the experience that got him into that position was as manager of Croydon FC and a youth assistant at Southampton and Man City. So you could say that this is a man who's very much underqualified for that position regardless, but nonetheless, he's moving up through the ranks at breakneck speed, all the way from Croydon FC coach to assistant manager of Chelsea in no time whatsoever. There's another individual called Harry Hudson, who is now the under-21s coach of Chelsea, another man from the Kinetic Academy who Joe Shields met along his way. And his previous experience, he's gone from Wycombe under-18 manager to Chelsea under-21 manager. Dan Hogan, this is quite an interesting case. This is now the man who's come in as Chelsea under-18 manager, and this is someone who doesn't have a UEFA license. He's completely underqualified, and Chelsea, following Enzo Maresca's sacking, I mentioned, have done a massive reshuffle of the club. And one of the moves was to remove Hassan Soliman, who was in situ as under-18s coach for Chelsea for 18 years. And from this list of individuals I mentioned just now, he's the only one who has a UEFA Pro license. And he's been, displaced from his position where he's had tremendous success in blooding a number of youngsters through the Chelsea Academy. Too many to list. And he's been sidestepped now, and his role at Chelsea is effectively just managing the bomb squad and looking after loans. And they've placed this man, Dan Hogan, who has limited experience anywhere instead. The second element to this, and you mentioned in your preface, George, is obviously the transfer element. And all of this comes back to one individual, a man called Emeka Obasi, who was a previous scout at Crystal Palace and had very close connections with the Kinetic Academy. And he's now the agent to individuals such as Romeo Lavia, Jadon Sancho, and Jamie Gittins. And obviously has close connections to a number of other agents who are very, very, well connected with Man City. And all of this has clearly resulted in a transfer approach where Chelsea are essentially not scouting players. We are doing deals by nature of nepotism and deal making with friends. And this is the reason why we currently have the likes of Lavia, Sancho, Gittins, Delap, Tossin, Cole Palmer. Obviously a couple of those have worked to an extent. Palmer, was lit up the Premier League for a brief period. Jadon Sancho was an okay-ish loan. Romeo Lavia has looked good when he's fit, but apart from these have all been pretty much disastrous signings, and I think it all reveals that there is this toxic, incompetent underbelly underneath Chelsea, underpinning all of our footballing activities, whereby these guys connected to this academy, Kinetic Academy, are essentially exchanging favors putting their mates into positions of authority at Chelsea, and all of this to the detriment of the club and the fans.
I think ultimately you're looking at a lack of meritocracy, both in the coaching and playing aspect. So clearly, from the coaching side of things, you won't see those fruits immediately, but at under 21, under 18 level, you want best in class for the Blues. We're spending billions, we're accruing hundreds of millions in losses. The route to the top, the route out of the financial difficulty is clearly going to be competing at the elite level. And it's well known economics in life that competition and meritocracy is going to drive efficiencies. And clearly, there's inefficiencies here if you're giving out jobs to the boys, jobs to the mates. In the more sort of prevalent, immediate sense on transfers, the whole premise of the project, talk from the outside, even talk from in, was that it was data driven, Brighton-esque, Moneyball-esque, cutting edge recruitment based off metrics that potentially other scouting scenes weren't seeing. And yet, in reality, it looks like Joe Shields via Emeka Obasi, via further mates, City connections, etc., has been given free rein off the back of that one Cole Palmer, £40 million raging success. There's no doubts that was a phenomenal bit of business, but that seems to have given license to a litany of subpar signings. I don't think one of those subsequent City signings has proven their worth. Even the free Tosin Adarabioyo probably isn't worth the wages he's been paid. You're talking about inflated fees for particularly Gittins, £55 million there. Lavia, again at the time, 60, was a hot prospect, but I did question whether that was worthwhile. I do think Liverpool, to be fair, were linked as well. But critically, Chelsea are top in agent fees now for the past 3 seasons. I think it was a £65 million spent on agent fees this past year. Are we, the football club, the fan base, been taken for a ride here?
I think we clearly are, and you've articulated the root of the issue so well there. This is a club now run by inept, incompetent clowns, running it as their private fiefdom now, exchanging favors with their friends, signing players on the basis that they're well connected with these individuals they know, not that they are fantastic footballers or that data demonstrates that they would be a top acquisition for us. And you mentioned Jamie Gittins. I feel like he is the transfer that's sort of the straw that broke the camel's back for Chelsea and is really starting to bring this corruption, call it what it is, corruption into sharp focus now. I mean, you look back on it, this was £55 million for a player in a market where Mateus Cunha, Brian and Mbeumo are going for similar amounts, Semenyo to City. These are Premier League ready players, and we are spunking that amount of money on a nobody. Someone who had a brief spell in the Dortmund team, obviously came through the City Academy. He wasn't even starting for Borussia Dortmund, and not only did we raise our bid, from 30 million initially in the summer, we took it all the way to 55 million and just absolutely got taken to the cleaners once again. And no, it makes you think no club in their right mind that is thinking logically would do that. You can't help but think that Emeka Obasi has just convinced his mates at Chelsea to sign his client no matter the cost, and we are reaping, what we sowed ultimately.
Time now for the opposition view. Up next for Resenya's reeling Blues, an ominously in form Manchester City. To preview this one, we've got returning citizen and top of the pods historian, Dom Johnson. Welcome back, mate.
Thanks for having me.
Sun's out, life's good. City, Carabao Cup in the bag. Wembley beckons again in the FA Cup. Slightly off the pace in the league and no European spoils this year. How are we feeling as a City fan, April 2026?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what we said in the reverse fixture when I came on the show. I think it is a transition season, be what it may about what Pep's going to do and whether he's going to leave. But there's some excitement in the camp, I'd say, um, especially off the back of the Carabao win against Arsenal at Wembley, which was brilliant and jubilant. It was kind of a shame that it was followed by an international break because I think we could have kicked on in the league there and perhaps had Arsenal playing under some real pressure. And I think now they're probably a bit more buoyed after their win against Sporting in the last minute. But no, I mean, if we walked away from the season with a Carabao Cup and an FA Cup and had run Arsenal close in league, I think it would still be two trophies. It would be disappointing. But I think this Chelsea game is huge. It's a big test. If we do get a result here and win, Arsenal are home to Bournemouth, who have got the longest unbeaten record in the league at the moment. Things could get nervy if they don't score early against them. It's 9 points, but we've got a game in hand. We've got to play Arsenal. If we beat them, it would be down to three. I think there is a chance. I mean, they've got their European run as well. Their fixtures aren't the hardest though, so we'll see.
It would be some fallow year, just the domestic double for Pep. On the league front, as you said, I think we were all getting a little bit excited, not only with your performance against Arsenal in the Carabao, pretty convincing stuff, but also their latest wobble, so the Saints. And then Sporting the other night was far from convincing. I do fear that Havertz late winner might give them a spring in their step ahead of that Bournemouth game. Our sort of general take on City is, say, business end of the season is when Pep typically comes to the fore. And it does finally look, those last two, you mentioned obviously the Carabao win, but you have more than picked up where you left with that 4-0 thrashing of Liverpool. And particularly, I'm guessing, Erling Haaland returning to the scene with a hat-trick after, again, relatively speaking, a goal drought for him. Is it fair to say you're looking red hot and almost City of old again, or are you still some way short of those vintage sides?
I think we're still a long way off the peak Pep City teams. That's for sure. This is a new team. Um, yeah, I think the Haaland hat trick. It was the first time he'd scored more than a goal in a game since something like October, and his last hat trick for City in the league was ages ago as well. It's great to see him back amongst goals, and it was a brilliant hat trick. And I guess the sort of Haaland mega fans would say, well, this is what happens when you give him service. And the ball's in from, I think it was Nunez and the ball through from Turkey were brilliant. And it does show when you do feed him, he's an absolutely unbelievable striker. We are clicking into gear, and I think like something I was listening back to the last City episode you did. I think that Ryan said it was just as we were signing Semenyo, and he was head in hand saying Chelsea, there's a proven asset there. They're not going for him. Why not? He'll be brilliant. And Ryan was bang on. Like having players like him and Cherky come into the team has really rejuvenated us, and Gay as well. Like a brilliant January window, especially. So I think we've got the moldings there of a really good, formidable team. Who knows what will happen with Pep? But I think we've been shown to we can adapt again. So the Pep Linders effect has been big. We're not just it's not 1,000 million passes now. I think we're moving with the Premier League, but it was really in what's been an up and down season, really nice to see us still play really positive, exciting football against Arsenal in that Carabao win and take them on. But no, we're not at that level yet. I think next year, depending on what happens in the summer, will be really interesting. But I think we really could kick on.
I think it's plain to see that January recruitment has been spot on, identifying areas of weakness perhaps, and executing with a couple of, say, proven targets that have fitted in seamlessly. Something that cannot be said for BlueCo, and something that we've decried, particularly on this episode in the theme section. A couple of other players, particularly in that Arsenal Carabao and then again against Liverpool, that sort of really stood out for me. I mentioned converging with some of those old City performances has been the reverse type for me of Bernardo Silva. Long been a fan of his. He announced he's leaving at the end of the season. Are we seeing him sort of squeezing that final juice there? Potentially Rodri returning to some pre-ACL form on top. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, I think I know you're a huge Bernardo Silva fan. I am as well. I think it's been a remarkable career that he's had at City. I mean, I think he's maybe Pep's favourite player ever. He's on record as saying. To see him drop into that deeper role and run games like that, and he does this thing where I think Arsenal really struggled without Raya in the cup final. Um, Kepa, one of your favourite keepers on this show, couldn't distribute the ball in the way that Raya did. Bernardo Silva, even when there's a keeper or a centre back who's not so confident on the ball, he'll literally just drop in that quarterback role, pick up the ball, bring it forward. And I think, I don't know, he's obviously his big enemy's Liverpool, but I think he'd really love to. He'll be there fighting to the end in this season. Him leaving in the summer, as you say, and Rodri, I mean, potentially going as well. There were some rumours today that he might be staying, but every time he goes to Madrid, he seems to find a way to speak to the Spanish press and drop a few hints. Um, it would be a massive departure for us and a huge change. Like, we'd be losing the sort of core of our side. So, yeah, I think those two will be absolutely integral to the end of this season. Whether Rodri gets back to that level that we saw pre ACL, I'm not sure, but he's really come on, and it's a step up from having the likes of Nico Gonzalez and Reinders in there.
There's parallels there with Enzo very much talking up a move to Madrid. But where the parallel ends for us, at least, is output, pedigree, performance from Rodri. He would very much merit that Madrid move, which I don't think Ryan and I believe that Enzo's remotely at that level.
Yeah, it's an interesting one
see.
with those quotes during international breaks, because obviously there's no football going on domestically, so journalists in their home countries like the UK are very keen to get stories. I was kind of digging into it a bit, and I think it basically comes from these players in Argentina or Spain or wherever they are speak to their friendly journalists in a way that they expect would just be sort of distributed among the national press, and it's just it won't be a huge story. It's not a Sky Sports interview, but then those comments get aggregated, and then because the UK press has nothing to talk about other than dead rubber England games, they then become headline news. I don't think it's. I know on this part of some players they are trying to drop messages, but I think that's why we see the cycle repeat.
An interesting insight. We'd give him the benefit of the doubt, but the follow-up subsequent interviews resultant to the initial outcry potentially suggests otherwise. He's been banned for this game, which again, both Ryan and I are probably quite happy on that front. Just on Chelsea, so we obviously had your thoughts on the circus that was Chelsea FC a few months back, but even since then, there's been a lot of water under the bridge. What are your revised thoughts, and I guess particularly a view on Rosenia?
Yeah, I mean, it's nice to play with a permanent manager, not who was it, Callum McFarlane, who managed to take a point off us earlier this season in one of the darkest moments of the campaign. um, I'm not sure. You guys, are the expert on Chelsea. I feel it does feel like the same problems recurring from when we chatted earlier in the season, around the circus. I was just thinking earlier though, like when we're talking about Semenyo and why Chelsea didn't go in for him, James Trafford's going to leave City at the end of the year. We brought in Donnarumma to win us trophies in commas and sort of be that leader. If we end up with two trophies, the domestic double, which Trafford has played huge roles in both competitions, it's quite an interesting thing where I don't know if he goes anywhere. I'd be recommending any Premier League club to snap him up because I think he's great. He's still young as well, but he's 6'7" or something huge, way bigger than most people realise, and he makes huge saves. Chelsea in general, I don't know. I'd be really interested on your take on the sort of Cole Palmer situation, because obviously when he left City, it was like, why have City let this guy go? He's unbelievable. Was it because he was playing in this sort of chaotic Poch era where he just could pick the ball up and do what he liked, and then came into a sort of Maresca team which was actually a lot more disciplined, and it was a lot harder for him to sort of find his way in a way that he would have had the same under Pep?
I do think that groin hernia issue cannot be understated. And then even, I think Tuchel touched upon it, Cole himself more recently, as stress, elements regarding stride length, physicality returning to previous levels. It's now, I think, very much a case of mentality. So that pain of not being the player he once was, now realizing that he physically is there again. So just getting his head right, which again, with all the noise of potential moves elsewhere, the United rumour seems to circulate.
Really?
Again, permanently. Talks that he was obviously a United fan as a kid, City Academy, and then I say he's clearly got group of friends that love a yap, and as you touched upon, some journalists that love stoking the fire there. There's also the wage cap with Chelsea, which I think is a very underappreciated element. So the likes of Cole, the likes of Enzo, rightly or wrongly, your Caicedos, as they receive sort of top level praise, Club World Cup winners, Cole's track record in the Premier League, it's only natural that they're going to be looking at peers earning good 100k plus on top of them. I think, not sure exactly what the likes of Semenyo Gehi are on, but a lot of those City players are pushing sort of 200, 250k. And I think one of the, say, less spoken elements of the BlueCo regime are these long-term contracts, but ideally with a relative wage cap. We're still talking sort of 150 grand. But there's only a couple of players beyond that, and those are your Reece Jameses, your Wes Fofanas, who are actually signed sort of prior to, say, this new policy. So Sunday coming around then, what are your sort of predictions? How's this game going to play out? And can we get a final score, please, for this one?
I think you're right to point out that the Arsenal game will have an effect on it. If Arsenal drop points, it'll be absolutely criminal if we don't win the game. I don't know. How confident are you? Would actually inform my prediction on City.
Not very confident at all. As I say, that Arsenal game, were Arsenal to win or win convincingly, show signs that those cup losses were a mere blemish, Raya back in net, etc., and order restored, charging towards a title and a potential European double. I do think City could stutter. A convincing win against Bournemouth might make it look as if that title's out of reach. But anything less than that, I'd be fearful to say. Haaland back in form. I think his first season against us, it was almost Messi-esque, where Chelsea had this hold. Messi hadn't scored against us for a while. Haaland in his first season scored against everyone, but not Chelsea. But beyond there, he's had a lot of joy against us, particularly at the Bridge, hat-trick against Liverpool. He's a streaky player. I wouldn't be surprised if he were to sort of brace up, and I'd be looking at a 3-1 City win.
Yeah, I think
totally honest.
I think you could be right. I mean, the worry I have with this is when we play teams in disarray, we often have absolutely batter them, like Spurs earlier in the season under Thomas Frank. 1-0, 2-0 up, but should have been 6 or 7. We had it against you at the Etihad as well. Like, should have been home and dry, and we end up fucking up. And I feel like we could pull away. It could be, as you say, 3-4-1. I hope it is, but there is that lingering doubt with this City team. We're not the killers that we've been in the past. We can't really put the ball in the fridge and just shut the game down with sort of the million passes philosophy at the moment. The good thing about this game, though, is it brings clarity. If we beat you and we make a statement, the title race is potentially back on, depending on what Arsenal do on Saturday. If we lose or if we draw, I think it's final nail in the coffin. That's it. It's Arsenal's. So whatever the result, I'm really looking forward to it. Going to be in the away end. We'll have to meet up beforehand. But yeah, we'll see. I mean, there's a slight affinity between Chelsea and City. So if you could give us a result, it would be quite helpful. But I know you've got your own objectives to achieve.
Sadly, our abysmal form of late dictates that we have to be, players and fans alike, gunning for all 3 points.
Would Maresca be a good replacement for Pep in the long run?
The interesting one, Maresca. I guess with the increasing disarray at the Bridge, there were positive comments from both Enzo and Cucurella decrying his departure. It's clearly, again, I think mixed up within the player base. I'm not sure Cole actually was too fond of him. Maybe the rigidities of the positional play. I have read that he would be Pep's proposition for a takeover. Whether, say, that's Fergie-esque fashion of preserving Pep's legacy, who knows? I do think he's slightly rigid. There's been a lot of complaints that he's failed to adapt and was almost Pep of a few years back, whereas, as you mentioned, with Linders, Pep has seen this new sort of transition, potentially more aggressive, less possession at all costs. In terms of whether I think he'd be a great appointment, if we were fit and in a good position to be challenging, I'd be probably quite happy. If we continue to be miles off the pace with it being a City Arsenal shootout, I'm not sure I'd be confident that he would stave off the North London club. I'd actually probably prefer a Luis Enrique coming your way if we're going to be nowhere near it.
Interesting. Yeah. I wonder as well, as you say, like following on from a big manager like Pep, maybe it needs to be someone in a completely different mold with their own sort of cachet to really drive them on rather than a sort of pale imitation. And I think you saw the same with Ferguson. And as you say, the manager before might want to continue the legacy and the style of play, but sometimes I think you need a clean break.
I do think the next obvious manager to come in and win titles multiples, be it continuation at City, he could even, I believe, salvage a United, would be Luis Enrique. I was there in Paris. I was there again at the Bridge, watched them last night. I think he is the only manager on the scene at the minute that comes close to Pep Guardiola and his influence and his quality at the minute. And I think he would be who I'd be looking for as the City hierarchy. 100%.
I think you're bang on. I mean, what they did we're recording this the day after the PSG Liverpool first leg. They just look brilliant. They do look reminiscent of sort of Pep's Barcelona. The players are so, as Jamie Carragher was saying, humble off the ball and then sort of arrogant on it. It's brilliant to watch. I mean, it's a weird one as a Premier League fan. Like, if Arsenal go the whole way in the Champions League and win it, it would be a massive affirmation for Arteta's style of play. If Arsenal don't, I mean, for the league that has absolutely dwarfs everyone financially now, it's a bit of an embarrassment what's going on. Teams like Liverpool have spent 450 million over the summer, as have teams like City and Chelsea, of course, as well. But yeah, it's interesting. I'd love to see what behind closed doors the likes of Maresca, Pep, even Klopp say about Arteta, someone who was raised under the sort of Pep philosophy, playing this style of play. And I guess, as you say, if he gets the result this year in the Premier League or potentially even the Champions League, then fine. If they don't, where does it leave him?
Thought Liverpool were pathetic last night. And if anything, that's probably been the biggest boost, the biggest modicum of positivity for Rosenior and Chelsea. With some shocking results of late. That Port Vale win does nothing to change that. But actually, those first 70 minutes, we did go toe-to-toe with them. Completely blown away beyond that. But I would really be looking to harness that if I were Rosenior, if I were Chelsea, for the remaining games of the season, starting on Sunday against Pep City. Catch you there for the game, mate. So hopefully the sun can persist and we'll have a beer beforehand.
Brilliant. As long as Ryan's there too.
Absolutely. I'll make sure he is.